What if I told you that the gold in your hand, your life savings, your family heirlooms, could be declared a federal crime tomorrow morning? It sounds like a conspiracy theory, but it actually happened in the United States. In 1933, the US government executed the biggest legal heist in history. They didn't just ask for your wealth, they demanded it. Hand it over, or face 10 years in a federal prison. But the real shocker? What they did the very next day after taking everyone's gold. Take the case of Frederick Campbell, a man who went to the bank to collect his own property and ended up with a federal indictment. This is a dark, untold story of Executive Order 6102. In September 1933, a New York attorney named Frederick Campbell walked into Chase Bank to make what should have been a standard withdrawal. He wasn't asking for paper cash. He wanted to collect his own property. Over 5,000 troy ounces of physical gold bars he had safely stored in the bank's vaults. But the tellers refused to hand it over. Campbell was turned away empty-handed, and the very next day, federal agents indicted him for trying to access his own assets. Campbell hadn't tried to rob the bank. He was caught in a trap set by his own government. Overnight, the rules of private property had been rewritten, making it a federal crime for citizens to hold physical wealth. To understand how a man could be arrested for demanding his own property, we have to look at the panic gripping the country in 1933. Thousands of banks were collapsing, and desperate citizens were rushing to withdraw whatever physical gold they could get their hands on. This chart shows the mathematical trap the government was caught in. Under the 1913 Federal Reserve Act, every paper dollar printed by the central bank had to be backed by exactly 40% physical gold in the vault. As terrified depositors kept draining the vaults, that gold reserve rapidly shrunk. Because of that 40% rule, the shrinking reserve forcibly dragged down the maximum currency supply right along with it. The Federal Reserve was legally paralyzed, completely unable to print the cash needed to stimulate the dying economy. President Roosevelt faced a brutal dilemma. To save the country from total collapse, he had to print money, but the law tied his hands until he could completely replenish those reserves. He needed physical gold, and the only place left to get it was directly from the pockets of the American public. To execute this massive transfer of wealth, Roosevelt needed extraordinary legal authority. His administration revived the Trading with the Enemy Act, a World War I statute designed to freeze hostile foreign assets, and applied those wartime powers to American citizens during peacetime. On April 5th, 1933, the President issued Executive Order 6102. It demanded that individuals and corporations surrender their gold to the Federal Reserve. Anyone caught hoarding faced up to 10 years in federal prison, a $10,000 fine, or both. The threat worked. Millions of ordinary Americans dutifully lined up outside banks and post offices, carrying their life savings to turn their physical wealth over to the state. The government didn't simply steal the gold outright. They compensated citizens with paper cash at the strictly fixed legal rate of $20.67 per troy ounce. By using the very real threat of federal prison, the government successfully coerced the public into giving up their hard assets, centralizing the nation's monetary wealth under strict state control. Once the vaults were full, Congress passed the Gold Reserve Act of 1934. This legally transferred title of all that newly confiscated gold from the Federal Reserve directly to the United States Treasury. This chart reveals a trap being sprung. The very day after signing the act, Roosevelt officially raised the price of gold from the $20.67 he paid the public up to $35 an ounce. The paper dollars people had just received instantly lost nearly half their purchasing power in gold. By arbitrarily changing the exchange rate on the exact same gold it had just forced citizens to sell, the federal government created an instant $2.8 billion profit on its balance sheet out of thin air. The administration had successfully executed a massive, legally mandated bait and switch. They forced the public to sell low, artificially revalued the market high, and used that enormous margin to finance a massive expansion of federal spending. The government still faced one major hurdle. For decades, thousands of private contracts, corporate debts, and even government bonds contained specific gold clauses. These were legal provisions guaranteeing that creditors would be repaid in physical gold coin, completely protecting them from paper currency devaluation. With gold now priced at $35 an ounce, if courts forced debtors to honor those existing clauses, the total debt burden across the country would instantly surge by nearly 70%. It would have triggered a wave of mass bankruptcies that the fragile economy couldn't survive. Congress tried to aggressively cancel these clauses, leading to a massive legal backlash. In 1935, these disputes culminated in the Gold Clause cases before the Supreme Court, placing the fate of the entire American financial system in the hands of 9 judges. In a razor-thin 5-4 ruling, the court sided with the president. They effectively voided billions of dollars in private contractual obligations to protect the government's control over the national currency system. The highest court in the land had drawn a hard line. When the survival of the national economy is at stake, the government holds the power to completely override the sanctity of private contracts. The physical evidence of this era was erased. Millions of deeply personal gold coins, family heirlooms, and private bullion pieces were hauled away and melted down into standardized, anonymous government bricks. All that confiscated wealth needed a permanent home. It became the bedrock of a heavily militarized facility, constructed specifically to guard the gold from the very citizens who had once owned it. Thousands of tons of gold were transported to Fort Knox and permanently locked away, entirely removed from the daily mechanics of the American economy. It would take 4 decades before American citizens legally regained the right to own gold bullion. But by then, the damage to the old system was permanent. The dollar had been completely severed from its physical anchor. The executive actions of 1933 killed the idea that money was a tangible, natural resource. They birthed the modern fiat economy we live in today, a world where money is no longer a physical object you can hold in your hand, but an abstraction powered entirely by the authority of the state.